Hi guys, I hope you're having a great week 8 and you're finishing the semester off strong. I'm here to talk to you today about my assignment 8-2 and what I chose to focus on. And what I chose to focus on was God's grace in the Old Testament, but more specifically God's grace to undeserving people in the Old Testament. The reason I picked this topic is because I think it is a common and reoccurring theme throughout the entire Old Testament. God picking out seemingly undeserving or unqualified individuals to do work for Him. Just to give a few examples, like Moses and the way that he had a speech impediment and he was chosen to speak. And God worked through that, and David and his there's a lot happened with David, but he was called a man after God's own heart despite all of the sin and everything that he went through. And I think that this is just a big attribute to the character of God, the way that he is constantly pursuing and the way that he is constantly redeeming and correcting us through grace. So I think one important thing to do when we're talking about a concept such as grace is to define it, because it is a term used often in churches, but we don't really talk about what it means. So I defined it from Merriam-Webster, and I'm picking up that definition right now, and it says, an unmerited divine assistance given humans for their regeneration or sanctification. So what does this mean to the studies that I did? So one thing that I thought was very interesting about that definition is when it says divine assistance for regeneration and sanctification. So this idea that God is assisting us to be sanctified and to be more like Him. So one thing that comes to my mind when I think about this regeneration process and becoming sanctified is correction, and the fact that grace can sometimes come in a form of discipline. And the way that or what I mean by that, I think can be tracked back to the Garden of Eden, when we see humans making a conscious decision to pick being more like God and being deceived by the serpent over being with God and being one with Him and walking in the garden with Him. So in that moment, we made the decision to follow our fleshly desires, and God noticed in that moment, as He always knew because He knows everything, that we were going to turn to the sinful nature. So He needed to make a sanctifying process. He needed to come and reach His people at the perfect time so that we could be with Him, because we were not ready for Eden. We weren't ready for the garden. We weren't ready for heaven yet. And quite frankly, we would taint it if we were in it because of our sinful nature. So God had to let our sins die. So as soon as we made that decision, God took us out of Eden in an act of grace to make sure that we would one day be able to walk with Him there. And then we see this entire process of God reaching into our lives from the very beginning. We have an entire Bible, especially the Old Testament, is full of stories of God reaching into undeserving people's lives and just using them, like Jonah when he tried to leave, and his correction, but His grace and still using him. So I think that can be very much applied to nowadays. And the way that God still continues to reach in and act in grace with us, and just like Romans 6:1 says, it doesn't mean we keep sinning. We want to be corrected and we want to be purified by the Lord. But He will reach in and He will correct us as His people. So I hope you have a great week, guys. See ya.